At the end of the company party, I looked for my wife, my eyes still filled with the happiness of having her by my side that night. As cold as our relationship had been in recent months, I believed that night could be a new beginning. We had danced like we hadn't in ages, and when we toasted with colleagues, I saw in her that smile that had made me fall in love years ago. But when the last guests began to leave and I realized she was no longer there, something inside me snapped like a dry twig. I went to the parking lot, and when I saw the lights of the car driving away with her in another man's passenger seat, I didn't think, I just reacted. I got in my car and followed them, my heart racing, my throat dry, my hands trembling on the steering wheel. And when I finally found them, standing in the shadow of an empty street, lit only by the headlight of an old street lamp, she got out of his car with a smile that had never been mine. When he saw me, he froze. It was the kind of fear that comes not from danger, but from guilt. A fear that paralyzes you because you know there are no more excuses, no more going back. She tried to say something, but before any sound could escape her mouth, I simply said, "You made your choice. Now I make mine." I didn't scream. I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I walked out of there with what dignity I had left and didn't look back. In the days that followed, there was silence. A silence that screamed inside the house, between the sheets still bearing her perfume, between the paintings hanging in the living room, among the travel photos, in the framed photo on the bedside table. I had to relearn how to make coffee for just one person, how to sleep on one side of the bed, how to look in the mirror and remember that there was still someone inside. Because when you're betrayed, it's not just your trust that dies. A part of your self-esteem dies too, the image of who you were with the other person dies. I began to retrace conversations, memories, small gestures, like a detective obsessed with finding where, exactly, everything began to fall apart. Was it on that trip? In that trivial fight over who would do the dishes? Or maybe that day she spent more time on her phone than beside me on the couch? I didn't know. I only knew I was on this side now. On the side of those left behind. She didn't contact me for the first few weeks. Maybe because she believed the man in the car would be her new beginning. Maybe because he thought I'd be there, waiting. But time, which drags on, also reveals. And that's exactly what happened. As the months passed, I heard from mutual friends that she was acting strangely. That the man she'd left with had disappeared. That she was down. That she was asking about me, but in a low voice, like someone whispering a longing she doesn't want to admit. When he finally called me, I didn't answer. And when he texted, I only responded 2 days later with, "I hope you're okay." Because, at that moment, something in me had already changed. I had cried, yes. But I had also rebuilt myself. The pain of betrayal had made room for self-love. And that's the kind of love that, when it grows, no longer accepts halves, or scraps, or excuses. She tried to arrange a coffee, saying she needed to talk. I accepted. We went to a discreet place, far from everything we'd been to before. Her eyes were red, but still beautiful. She'd always been beautiful. But there, sitting across from me, she seemed smaller. Not physically, but emotionally. She spoke with a voice that no longer held certainty. She asked me for forgiveness, saying that what she'd had with him meant nothing, that she'd been confused, that she'd thought our love was over, but realized too late it was only dormant. That he'd disappeared when she'd mentioned commitment, that he'd left her with a silence greater than the one she'd left me with on that street. I heard it all. In silence. And when she finished, breathing as if waiting for absolution, I simply said, "I forgive you. But I'm not coming back." And I saw, there, in her eyes, something breaking. Because the forgiveness she expected came with the hope of return. But no. I forgave her to free myself, not to return. I forgave her because I was already at peace. And it was in that moment that she understood, that her love for me still existed, but mine, had already moved on. Time passed, and with it, life introduced me to someone. Someone who arrived without promises, but brought everything I'd forgotten I deserved. A sincere smile. Respect in every word. A light love, without games, without suspicious absences, without the constant feeling that something was about to fall apart. I found myself smiling again, not to hide the pain, but because there was real joy. I found myself making plans, small and large. I saw myself, most of all, becoming myself again, but an even better version of myself, because I'd hit rock bottom and resurfaced. She, on the other hand, sent me one last message, months later. It simply said, "You were the love of my life. And I lost you." I didn't reply. I kept the message for a while, but then deleted it. Because keeping words of pain from those who hurt us only delays the path of those who are trying to flourish. And I wanted to flourish. Years passed. Not many, but enough. One day, by chance, rummaging through old boxes, I found a note. It was mine. A note I had written and hidden between the pages of a book I was going to give her as a gift, but never did. In the note, I said I wanted to have a child with her. That I wanted to build a house with a porch, hot dogs, lazy Sundays, and dinners filled with laughter. That, despite the hardships, I still believed in her. I read that note in silence, and felt a lump in my throat. Not of longing, but of grief. Mourning for a future that never existed. Mourning for a love that could have been eternal, but was betrayed by a thoughtless choice. And that's where the Real story begins. Because the pain of betrayal isn't in the scandal, nor the scream, nor the end itself. It's in what dies unnoticed. In the touch that never happens again. In the good night that turns to silence. In the gaze that no longer finds the other. In the certainty that turns to doubt. In the promise that is broken without fanfare. And when all this passes, all that remains is just one question: how far can a wrong choice take us? Because sometimes, what hurts isn't losing the other person. It's losing yourself in the process. And love only survives where there is truth. And when that truth is betrayed, what's left is a broken heart and a story that can never be told the same way again. But was she ever able to understand? What did you really lose? Welcome to the channel. Here, betrayal is never romanticized, is shown as it really is, a choice that destroys lives, homes and hearts. The stories you'll hear are fictional, but inspired by realities many have experienced. Our purpose is clear: show that those who cheat may even regret it, but there is not always time to go back. Get ready. What you're about to hear is a shocking, intense and unforgettable story. Good story. She always liked the way he adjusted his shirt collar before leaving, as if the outside world demanded a flawless version of him, yet he still maintained the calm look of someone who knew exactly who he was. He was the kind of man who preferred peace to noise, touch to shouting, presence to spectacle. His name was Ethan, and at 35, he bore the features of someone who had weathered a few storms but never lost his sweetness. He worked as a planning manager at a logistics company and had a stable routine, the kind many despise until the day they lose it. As for her, the wife he met in a cafe on a rainy afternoon 6 years earlier, her name was Olivia. She was 33, with a captivating smile and a gaze that always seemed to seek something beyond, as if ordinary life wasn't yet enough to fulfill her. She was a marketing analyst and enjoyed color, novelty, and environments that exuded lightness and beauty. Olivia was intense, yet discreet, passionate, yet demanding. When they met, they seemed like pieces that didn't quite fit together, but they still found a way to build a fit that was their own, made of silent concessions, mutual admiration, and a connection that, at the time, seemed unshakable. In the early years, they were practically inseparable. They had picnics in parks, cooked together recipes that never turned out as planned, but laughed as if everything were perfect. They had a tacit pact of honesty, the kind that isn't verbalized every day but is proven in small choices, like turning off your cell phone at dinner or leaving notes hidden in each other's bags. Over time, responsibilities crept in. Bills, tight schedules, commitments that couldn't be postponed. Ethan started working more, trying to ensure stability. Olivia, on the other hand, became increasingly involved in creative projects, events, campaigns, and with people who lived in a different world than at home. Still, they maintained the habit of sleeping hand in hand and saying, "I love you," even on days when they weren't sure they felt it as strongly as before. The house they lived in was small but full of life. Pictures on the walls, books scattered everywhere, plants in almost every room, most of them her own doing. On Sundays, Ethan liked to tend the garden while Olivia played music and jotted down loose ideas in old notebooks. Time, however, has a silent way of changing landscapes, and certain routines that were once comforting began to weigh heavily. Olivia began to complain about the monotony, the predictability, the lack of surprises. She said she missed the spontaneity, the impulses, the lightness. Ethan listened, tried to understand, but he also felt tired, exhausted by the pressure of keeping everything running smoothly. They didn't fight often, but the silence between them began to carry more than words could bear. They still loved each other, but perhaps not in the same way. When they started talking about children, the conversation never went any deeper. Olivia said it wasn't the right time, that she still wanted to enjoy herself more, explore other things. Ethan respected that, though secretly he'd imagined himself pushing a stroller or teaching a toddler to ride a bike. It was a silent desire, one he hid for fear of appearing controlling, for fear of rushing something that needed time. And perhaps also because he didn't want to face the truth, that they were in different times. Even so, he was still by her side, because love, for him, had always been more than just being happy, it was being present. It was caring even when it hurt, listening even when he didn't want to speak, waiting even without guarantees. Friends noticed something had changed. They didn't comment, but their glances lingered for seconds longer. At parties, they didn't let go of each other like before. In photos, their radiance seemed forced. Olivia became increasingly involved with work, with colleagues, with events that kept her out late. Ethan, for his part, was beginning to get used to the solitary dinners, the movies watched alone on the couch, her absence even when she was present. Still, he never stopped asking how her day was, making her coffee just the way she liked it, putting her coat in the wash without her asking. Small gestures that, for him, were ways of saying, "I'm still here." For her, perhaps, they were just noises in a life that was beginning to feel too small. At work, Olivia was praised and admired. Colleagues saw her as intelligent, determined, and charming. And, in a way, she thrived on this. She felt alive, desired, and heard, something that was beginning to be lacking at home. Not that Ethan didn't value her, but his compliments came as part of the package. They no longer held the freshness of novelty. They no longer stirred the same emotion in her. Often, she found herself remembering the beginning, how everything was light, intense, and full of possibilities. And then, she compared it to today and felt an emptiness she couldn't explain. A silent unease. An uneasiness that grew with each repeated routine, each weekend without surprises, each conversation that ended with a "we'll see later." Ethan felt this distance. He noticed when she looked away, when she responded in monosyllables, when she avoided the affection that once came naturally. He tried not to suffocate, tried not to demand, but he kept it all in. He swallowed the fear of losing the love of his life and smiled, because he'd always believed that love was also about resilience. On his nightly walks alone, he thought about his parents, married for decades, and how their love had survived crises, illnesses, and losses. He wanted to be like that. He wanted them to survive too. But there was something in that relationship that was no longer under his control. Something that slipped through his fingers even with all the care in the world. Despite this, when he was with her, love still overflowed in the details. In the way he smoothed her hair when the wind ruffled it, in the way she nestled into his chest when sleep came early. They were moments, but they still existed. And he clung to these fragments like someone holding an old photograph, even if yellowed, still capable of providing warmth. Olivia, for her part, oscillated between the comfort of a life built with respect and curiosity about everything she had yet to experience. The conflict was internal, but its reflections echoed in every decision, in every silence, in every unexplained absence. The company party was approaching, and it would be the first Ethan would accompany her to in a long time. She hesitated to invite him, saying it might be boring, that he didn't know anyone, but relented when she saw his enthusiasm. He saw it as an opportunity. A night to reminisce, reconnect, start over. He chose his outfit carefully, applied perfume that smelled of fond memories, and when they arrived, he held her hand as if grasping a chance. Olivia was beautiful. Stunning, even. But there was a lightness in her gestures that didn't seem to originate from him. As if, that night, she were somewhere else. He didn't want to think about it. He preferred to believe it was just the atmosphere, the music, the wine. He preferred to believe she was still there with him, despite everything. And it was this belief that kept him going for most of the night. Until the moment the music slowed, the guests began to leave, and he, looking for her around the now empty dance floor, realized she was no longer there. And there began the silence that would change everything. The absence that, by the time it was noticed, was already too late. The story that was slowly unfolding, between gestures, desires, and choices, was about to change tone, and none of them were prepared for what would come next. But it wasn't the end yet. It was only the beginning of what would later be remembered not as a tragedy, but as a turning point. And like every turning point, it began in silence, before the first impact. Time passed like a breeze disguising a gale. Months after the separation, the memories settled in the back of Ethan's mind like a forgotten book on a high shelf. He no longer thought of her with anger, nor with love. He thought with distance, like someone observing something that no longer belongs to them. His routine had changed. The house was lighter, the silences more comfortable, and solitude had ceased to be a punishment and became companionship. He relearned how to cook for one, how to watch movies without expecting comments from his side, how to sleep peacefully without fearing the sound of absence. There was pain, yes, but there was also serenity. Olivia, on the other hand, carried her soul like an old suitcase, full of regrets and memories too heavy to start over. The nights were long, the days repetitive, and the echo of her own choices became unbearable. The man for whom she had left everything had disappeared without warning, without goodbye, without explanation. A dry, cruel silence. And for the first time, she began to understand the real meaning of loneliness. It's not being alone, it's knowing that no one else will come. One afternoon, Olivia appeared at Ethan's door. The sound of the doorbell brought back a feeling he thought he'd never feel again, a mixture of surprise and discomfort. When he opened the door, he saw her there, thinner, her eyes weary, her shoulders hunched under the weight of a regret no apology could alleviate. She asked to come in. He hesitated, but led the way. The house, once the scene of so much laughter, now seemed strange to her. She discreetly touched the living room table, as if searching for a trace of what had been. "You look fine," she said, her tone barely audible. Ethan responded calmly, without irony. "I've learned to stay." The phrase hung in the air between them, like a sentence. She tried to smile, but her face no longer resembled that of the woman he'd once believed invincible. "I need to tell you something," she said, her voice wavering. "I didn't come to ask you to come back. I know it's too late for that. But there's one thing you need to know, about what happened." Ethan leaned back on the couch, watching her. There was no longer any anger, just a quiet curiosity, the same one you feel when you read a book whose ending you want to know, even if you already know it will be sad. Olivia took a deep breath before continuing. "Do you remember when we talked about having children?" she asked, and he nodded. "Back then, I thought I wasn't ready, that I wanted more time for myself. But what I never told you is that you gave me something I didn't know how to appreciate: security, calm, constancy. I thought love needed to be intense all the time, that it needed to take my breath away. And when he appeared, with that different way, I believed I was feeling everything I was missing. I let myself be carried away by what seemed like passion, but was just vanity. When he disappeared, I realized what I had thrown away wasn't love, it was home. Ethan listened in silence. Inside, a mixture of compassion and disbelief. You've always had a home here, Olivia. But you chose to leave. And the worst part is, I understand. Sometimes, we only understand the value of calm when everything falls apart. She looked at him, tears held back. It wasn't just that. There's something I need to return to you. She opened her bag and took out a yellowed envelope, in his handwriting. I found this among my books. A note from you. It was inside that novel you gave me for our 3rd anniversary. You never told me you left something there. Ethan frowned, carefully picking up the envelope. He recognized his own handwriting, and for a moment, the world seemed to stop. He opened the paper and read the words he'd written years before, an impulse that now hurt more than any betrayal. One day, I want to see our children running through this house. I want to grow old by your side. I want you to know that even on the days when I seem distant, I'll still be here. The silence that followed was piercing. Olivia brought her hands to her face. When I read this, I realized what I destroyed. You talked about the future, and all I thought about was escaping the present. I traded you for emptiness. Ethan set the paper on the table. His eyes were watering, but not from pain, from grief. The grief of a love that, though dead, still left flowers in memory. I wrote this note the day I decided to ask you to start a family. I was waiting for the right moment. But it never came. Olivia sobbed softly, her words coming out like a belated outburst. I was a coward. I wanted to live something new, when the new was here. And now, I have nothing left to offer but regret. He stood and went to the window. Outside, the afternoon was fading, and the sunset colors bathed the room with a beautiful, cruel melancholy. You know, Olivia, I spent months trying to understand what I did wrong. But now I understand that the mistake wasn't mine, nor yours. It was time's. We lost ourselves trying to hold on to what no longer held, and when one tried to save it, the other had already given up. She approached, extended her hand, but he drew back, not aggressively, just firmly. I don't want you to touch me. Not out of anger. But because touching you is like returning to a place I took a long time to escape. She nodded, wiping her face. I just wanted to hear you say you forgive me. Ethan turned, looking at her calmly. I forgive you, Olivia. I truly do. But forgiveness isn't an invitation to start over. It's just a peaceful ending. She burst into tears. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. Ethan approached the door and, in a firm voice, said, You didn't just lose a marriage. You lost someone who still believed in love even after seeing it at its worst. Before she left, he added tenderly, Take care of yourself. I've done this for too long. Olivia staggered out, her face etched with a regret that stung like fire. Outside, the rain was beginning to fall lightly, as if the sky, too, was mourning the end of something that could have been eternal. She walked to her car, clutching the note that now felt like it weighed a ton. She read his words again, and each letter cut like glass. Inside the car, she cried until her body gave out. For the first time, she understood what true love was, not what made her feel alive, but what made her better. And she also understood that love, when betrayed, doesn't die, it becomes absence. Ethan, alone again, picked up the envelope from the table and tucked it inside a book. Then he turned out the lights and sat in the dark, listening only to the sound of the rain. There were tears in his eyes, but it wasn't sadness. It was liberation. The past had finally found its place, and the present was clean enough for the new to enter. His love for Olivia had transformed into learning, into strength, into a kind of bitter gratitude. And there, in that silence between the last tear and the first breath of peace, he understood that the true end of a love story isn't when the other leaves, it's when we learn to stay. That night, Olivia couldn't sleep. She sat up in bed, opened her phone, and, not daring to send it, wrote one last message: "You were the love of my life. I only realized it when I was no longer part of yours." She read it and deleted it. She knew it was no use. Her love now lived in another body, in another time. And hers, the impatient, fleeting, and confused love, would be trapped in the echo of a forgotten note, in the reflection of the man she only learned to value when she could no longer call her own. Ethan, for his part, looked out the window and smiled. Not because he was happy, but because he was free. Life, generous as it rarely is, would reward him with something he no longer sought, a new love, pure and serene. But that would be another story. Time followed its course like a river that, even unhurriedly, never returns to its source. The scars remained, it's true, but they no longer bled. Ethan, now in a new phase of life, rediscovered himself completely. It didn't happen overnight, nor easily. There were moments of heavy silence, of persistent memories and longing for what could have been. But it was in the midst of this emptiness that he found new meaning. The freedom to start over without carrying the guilt of mistakes he didn't make made him blossom in a silent yet profound way. One day, while drinking coffee in a small bookstore he liked to visit on Sundays, he met someone who, instead of promising him the world, simply offered him presents. She was a woman with a light smile, sincere words, and a calm that reminded him so much of his own. There was no initial fire, no hasty promises. She was different. She was stable. And that was exactly what he needed. Over time, they began to get to know each other. Without haste, without fear, with the honesty that only those who have suffered from loving wrongly can offer. The past stayed where it belonged, in the past. Love was reborn in Ethan, but now with maturity. He had learned to love better, first himself, then others. The pain that had shaped him had transformed into wisdom, and what had once destroyed him now guided him. He began to see life more clearly, like someone cleaning a dirty lens after a long time. The new woman at his side, even though she hadn't lived his past, knew how to respect him. She never asked too many questions, never tried to be a comparison. She simply walked beside him, and that was more than enough. They traveled together, laughed together, dreamed together. For the first time in years, Ethan began to plan for the future without fear. And in that future, there was now room for new chapters. One day, sitting beside her, holding her hand as firmly as he had once let go of Olivia's, he realized he had won. Not because he had overcome, but because he had healed. Olivia, on the other hand, took a very different path. After that visit to the house where she once built her dreams, she plunged into a period of isolation. Work was no longer enough to fill the gaps growing inside. Lonely nights stopped being freedom and became punishment. She tried to connect with others, but no connection was real. She compared everyone to Ethan, and they all lost. She sought in the touch of other men the security she once had but couldn't recognize. But nothing was enough. Regret became a constant shadow, and over time, she began to relive each choice like someone watching a horror film where the protagonist is herself. She tried to return to old habits, to visit places where they were happy, but everything was too loaded with memories. He began writing in an old notebook. Not public texts, not social media rants. Just unsent letters, pages filled with confessions and laments. In one, he wrote, "The hardest pain isn't losing someone. It's realizing that true love existed, and you discarded it because you didn't know it was the last." He kept that note he found among his books as if it were a relic, but it no longer warmed him, it only hurt. The image of Ethan reading it back, his eyes filled with everything he felt but never said, haunted her for nights on end. It was like a mirror, forcing her to face the woman she was and the woman she had become. As time passed, the way people looked at her changed. People stopped admiring the confidence she exuded and began to notice the weariness in her eyes. She lost friends, lost energy, even lost the pleasure in the little things. She began to live on autopilot, sustained only by the weight of guilt and memory. There was no one left to share Sundays with, and morning coffees became too silent. One day, she happened to run into Ethan and his new partner at a restaurant. They were holding hands, laughing at something simple. He saw her, smiled politely, and turned his attention to the woman beside him. That gesture, simple and honest, was like an invisible knife piercing her chest. Not because he ignored her, but because she understood, with the brutality of reality, that the love she had destroyed was not only over, it had transformed into love for someone else. That night, he wrote another letter. In it, he didn't ask for forgiveness. He simply thanked her. He said he now understood what it means to love someone, to care even when things are difficult, to stay even when everything tells you to leave. He said he was the best chapter of her life, but that she tore the pages before reading to the end. And that now, all that remained was the echo of words never spoken, promises never kept, and dreams never realized. And so, each followed their own path. Ethan walked lightly, not because he'd forgotten, but because he'd learned. Olivia walked with the weight of an emptiness that can't be filled with replacements, because true love isn't recyclable. The choices we make often don't reveal who we are, they show how much we're willing to lose for an illusion. If you've made it this far, this story definitely touched something inside you. So tell us, what did you think of this story? Have you ever experienced something similar? Did you empathize with any of the characters? Leave your comment, we want to know your opinion. And if this story touched you in any way, subscribe to the channel right now, because here you'll always find stories that make you think, that move you, that provoke you. Here, there's no room for romanticizing mistakes. Remember, cheating doesn't just destroy a relationship, it destroys trust, respect, the future that was being built. There's no such thing as an innocent betrayal, and forgiveness, when it comes, isn't a guarantee of a new beginning. Sometimes, it's just the dignified end of a love that deserved so much more. And let it be clear, this channel does not support any type of betrayal. Our mission is to show, through fiction, what so many people experience in real life, and how emotionally difficult it is to trade what is certain for what is uncertain. Until the next story. May it find you more aware, and more whole.